Hello and welcome to the Untranslatable Podcast. We are here recording episode 72, and we have a very, very, very special guest on with us today. So today we will be talking about some of his compositions, and I'm really excited as a music nerd to have him on our episode today. I think it will be a wonderful episode, especially for all of our music lovers from around the world. So we really hope you appreciate today's episode. So today we have a wonderful guest, Michael Djupstrom, who is a composer, professional pianist, and although I've only been talking to him for a few minutes, he strikes me as a Renaissance man, so we're very happy to have him on. But before we get to that, we're here with my buddy Jared. What's going on, Jared?
Hello. What makes a Renaissance man?
Jay-Z
is a Renaissance man, I know that.
That's true. I mean, I guess when I think of Renaissance man, it's a man who can do many different things well. And I've watched some of the YouTube videos of Michael, and he seems like a fantastic pianist. A huge fan of his music as well. And his music has, I mean, we'll get him to actually talk about it because I think it's better to hear directly from him. But my impressions of it, there's a lot of different influences, and he can compose a lot of different styles of music. So we're very happy to have him on today.
Quite an answer. Well, welcome to the Untranslatable Podcast, everyone. I was not expecting that answer. I am Jared, the Renaissance man. And to see some of our Renaissancing activity, follow us on Twitter, Untranslatable1, the number 1. Follow us on Instagram. You can see me renaissancing around Philadelphia and soon to be Berlin and Czech Republic. I'm going to be in Berlin and Prague in a week. Well, for the people listening to this, it'll be 5 days. Yep. But so you see, follow us on Instagram, Untranslatable Podcast, or you can email us. Mostly Chad. He needs some more Czech untranslatables.
That's true.
Untranslatables are idioms, sayings. Maybe weird sayings. Do you think of any weird sayings your mom used to tell you that make no sense, but you know exactly what she means? We'll get back to that. Some of those, and you can email us some. Chad needs some more Czech ones. He's running low. I'm still a master at the internet.
You're not wrong.
That's what makes me the Renaissance man that I am. That's all I have, Chad. Oh, wait, that's not all I have. One more thing is please spread a little love and give us 5 stars reviews on iTunes and Stitcher.
Absolutely. So I think we should get into our interview with Michael. And so, as I mentioned, he is a professional pianist, composer, and also composition teacher. He studied just down the road from where my parents live at the University of Michigan, and also spent some time in Paris. So we're very excited to hear what he was up to during that time. And he teaches a compositional seminar at the Curtis Institute of Music. And he has also won many acclaimed awards and different prizes from international composition competitions, such as the UK's Dahlia Society, the American Viola Society, the Chinese Fine Arts Society, and I'm sure there are plenty more. So we're very happy to have you on, Michael. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So what did you do in Paris? Like it said, I looked up, I Googled you.
Uh-oh.
Did I mention I'm good at the internet?
You did your research. It's obvious.
But it said Paris. Chad and I, we have a love-hate relationship with Paris. Not that we say it's overrated, but that's also giving it the respect that it deserves because it is one of the greatest cities. But what did you do in Paris?
I went there twice. I mean, I've been there more than twice, but I was there for like 2 periods of time. The first one was 3 months because I hadn't done a lot of planning, and the maximum anyone can stay if you don't plan is 90 days.
That's true.
Correct.
And also I had no financial sources other than my savings, so it would have run out shortly after 3 months anyway. I had finished a master's degree at U of M, as you just heard, and there had been a visiting professor there. I think she had come actually 3 times, but while I was a student, she came for 2 different semesters. Her name was Betsy Jolas. She's a composer. She lives in Paris, and at the time she was living in Paris. And I had been really fascinated by some of the things she had said in seminars. I wasn't her private student, but I'd gotten to hear her give presentations and talk about what music was like, what contemporary music was like in France. and I had wanted to study abroad. I had wanted to live abroad in any case. And so I just literally reached out to her and said, "Hi, I remember you from Michigan. I would really like to study with you. Is that possible?" She was retired already from teaching at conservatory, but she had private students. Okay. And she said, I mean, really simply, "Yes, you can.
That's
I'll
great.
be there, mostly during this time and this time. I'll have to leave a little bit, but I can be there and have you as a student." So we set it up, and I went for 3 months. After which, I guess I was actually there for 3 periods. So I was there for 3 months studying with her.
The government's not listening. You can tell them the truth.
No, I didn't.
We'll be there for 4 months.
I did nothing wrong at that point yet. So then I went back for a short-term festival that following summer, which she was teaching. And after that festival was finished, she let me know that there was a grant that same music academy gave to its graduates. I mean, they call it an academy. Essentially, they run short-term master classes. But anybody who's participated in a master class is eligible to apply for these grants. And she said, I was thinking it might be interesting to you to come back to Paris for a longer time in the near future and work for me as a personal assistant.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, she had done the same thing. She explained to me that she had been the assistant for Darius Milhaud, who's a really famous teacher, famous composer, famous teacher in French musical history, really in world musical history. And she was his personal assistant. And also she had been sort of an informal, what's the right word? Olivier Messiaen was another composer who taught at the Paris Conservatory. He was an organist and extremely famous composer. Betsy had been his student in the class, but she was older than a lot of the other students. And so later on in his career, as he was touring more and more on the organ, he asked her to replace him at the class. So she had been not personal assistant to Messiaen, but she had kind of been his assistant, like his replacement teacher. And then when
like a substitute.
Like a permanent substitute, exactly. And then when he finally retired, she had to apply officially for the position, but she essentially took over his class. So she said, that experience of being an assistant, both in a teaching sense and then with her other former teacher, a business sense, a musical sense, also, it had been really instructive for her, like illuminating to see what the life of a senior composer was like. And so she proposed the same idea to me. So I proposed that idea to the foundation, and they supported it. So then I went back the following year, which is 2008, for a longer period. At that time it was 6 months, to work, still to take lessons from her, but also to work as her personal assistant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So I have a question for you, Michael. What are some of the things that you learned as a composer working under, her name is Betsy, right?
Yeah.
So what were some of the things you learned as a composer under Betsy, but also, as an adult, as a human being while you were living abroad? It can be a very exciting, sometimes overwhelming and daunting experience.
As you know. Musically, I would say I learned a lot of things. The French contemporary music scene was and is really different than the American contemporary music scene. To boil it down into a few points is difficult, but something I can definitely say, I learned to be, it sounds a little bit abstract, but I'll explain, to be more demanding of my musical materials from Betsy, which is to say that instead of simply, I should say, because intuition is the most important thing I think we have as creators, but instead of simply letting the intuition pull you in any direction, pull the piece in any direction, she taught me the right word is to be more demanding with the material, to see what the material needs to do itself, but to also have an idea of what you want the piece to be, and not simply to let sort of fantasy take you. In a creative sense, I think we do need to let fantasy take us places, because that's how you come up with things that don't exist yet. I mean, that's kind of the mystery. You can't define how we create. But in terms of creating a discrete piece of art, I think that she showed me how important some additional intellectual control could be over that creative fantasy.
So by that you mean maybe more adding sort of that classic musical science as far as structure and how that stuff goes to it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but almost that maybe earlier on when you sort of fought that a little bit more and you thought like this, because I sometimes question that too when I listen to a lot of more classical music, where it's like, is I sometimes wonder if they're like constricted by the form and sort of trapped into this into a lane.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a balancing act to sort of not crush the creativity and be too intellectual. But if you want to create something that is more than, let's say, just noodling around on the piano, just improvising on the spot, if you want to create something with a sort of greater impact on the long term, you have to be more intellectually in control. I remember, I remember her telling me, like, saying the words noodling as a critical like analysis of something I'd been doing. And she said, it needs to be more than that. And especially in the first time I was studying there with her, we didn't actually examine the music I was writing very often, maybe never those first 3 months. I can't recall exactly, but we looked at a lot of pieces from the past written by other composers. So officially studied music analysis, which was the course that she had been teaching at the conservatory in the beginning. She was, just an analysis teacher rather than a composition teacher, which was added later for her. So we looked at music by all sorts of composers, like music from the Renaissance, music from contemporary France, music from the classical period, music from the Romantic period, and we together analyze them in as much detail as possible to sort of not analyze it from a dogmatic perspective like you might do in a music theory class, but to look at it as if you were the composer, to try to put yourself in Beethoven's shoes or Boulez's shoes or whoever the composer was, and see why they had made all the decisions they had made in order to create a piece of music that made sense as a whole. And in looking at all that music from so many different stylistic and historical periods, I saw that the thing that struck me the most is that all these composers, regardless of where they're coming from, historically or stylistically, they had such control over their material. And that's
fascinating.
That's the most important thing I'd say that I learned from that experience working with her.
Right. Wow.
And what about living in Paris as not only as a composer, but being, and some people call it the city of love. It's very famous. So what was that like for you?
It was phenomenal. I still love Paris, and I've been back many, many, many times. As a composer, also, I think you said not only as a composer, but as a composer, it was also interesting working for her. It was both encouraging and depressing simultaneously, in that I saw her life as a composer fighting to have a career, working with a career, building a career, developing a career. And at the time she was in her 80s, so an extremely senior composer. Really respected within the French musical establishment of the absolute highest order in terms of respect. But even someone like that had to fight for her career, was constantly having to promote her music, was having to negotiate commissions, was having to do all the same things that I was having to do as a really young composer. So on the one hand, it was shocking, really, because I thought, heck, if she has to fight this hard, how am I going to possibly make it, right? This is not fair. But on the other hand, I thought, well, in a certain sense, I'd already arrived at being professional, whatever that means, because someone like that is fighting the same battles that I was fighting and still am today, right? So
that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience being that close to the career of an extremely senior composer.
It can be deflating, but then you can also see that it kind of puts where you're at in perspective, and you kind of be like, oh, can I do this? Am I going to be able to get to this person's level? But it's she's going through the same struggles that I'm going through.
Exactly.
And that it's just the game.
It's just what happens.
Yeah.
If you're going to do this is how you play.
Yeah. So I guess could be terrifying, could be exciting, depending on
it's
how
both.
you look at it.
It was both.
Sure.
Yeah.
Both. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're a teacher, so you don't still fully have that fear, do you? Or it's like you're sort of riding on it like that?
Oh no, all the time. It never goes away. It doesn't go away at all. That's good. I like that. In terms of financial support, my teaching is, I can't do the percentages for you, but if you ask me to define my identity as a musician, but I would say a composer most of all.
Right.
I'm a pianist also. I'm a performing musician, and I'm a teacher. So, and it's not like some people have, really excellent university positions which essentially support them. And then as much as they can, they write on the side in whatever time they have left over. But here, at this school, it's different. Most of the vast majority of the teaching positions are adjunct. So we each, determine how much we want to teach, and then work that out with the administration and have a situation that works for us. So here, in the current position I'm in, I only teach here 1 day a week. I teach one composition seminar. Okay. So it's part of my career, but it's not the financial pillar that so one might imagine. So no, I'm still riding that wave or
Wow,
fighting
that's
fighting
cool.
those battles, just like when I was 27, same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So, when did you? How'd you get into the music to begin with? Like band and elementary school and all that stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. It was band in elementary school. My mom had played the piano. Like a lot of kids played the piano. She took piano lessons from the person down the street. I don't really know if that's true, but something like
Yeah, I
that.
got
Didn't
you.
take it seriously at all. But she could show me the rudiments when I was a really little kid. I don't actually remember it very well, but apparently when I have a sister 5 years older, when she was taking recorder in school, it was something that you did back then in fourth grade in our district. Everyone played
We
the
did
recorder.
in our school as well.
Same at our school.
Okay,
too.
so everyone
Yeah.
knows. Yeah, fourth graders played the recorder. And I guess I wanted to play her recorder all the time. So I would take it and play it. And eventually they said, okay, we can get you your own recorder. So they went down to the local music store and bought me a similar plastic recorder. And I
Sounds
played
like a
it.
fun house.
Oh, it must have been noisy, right? So I played the recorder all the time. And I had been interested, obviously, in the piano whenever there was a piano present. Like my grandparents had a piano, my mom's parents.
You
so I
just
would
noodle around on it.
Exactly. It
Nice.
started early. No, they realized that I had interest, like real interest in music. So they found me a local piano teacher, that kind of down the street person who was actually like the local church organist. And I studied with that particular teacher. Her name was Lillian Roston. I studied with her all the way through high school.
Oh, wow.
And at a certain point, she said, you're taking this. I mean, obviously you love it and you have some talent. You should take it more seriously if you want to do anything with it professionally. And I said, well, let me think about it. So I thought about it for a week between those lessons. And I came back and said, no, I don't think I'm going to do anything with this professionally.
About it beforehand? Had you not realized
No, I'd never taken it seriously.
you're just like, this is what I do?
It's fun.
Yeah.
And
Right,
anything
sure.
I did, as in playing the piano or even writing little tiny pieces of music, which I started doing just for the heck of it. I thought that was natural. I thought anybody who took piano lessons did that.
And when you're a kid, also, at least for me, let me put it this way: when I'm a kid, I don't really think of something as like that as a job. You can't live off of that.
No,
It's like-
you don't. I mean, you can only imagine what you've been exposed to, right? Who your models are, and
Right.
all the people's who, all the composers whose music I was playing, they all died a long time ago. I'm not really sure I even realized concretely that somebody still had to write music now. Like that didn't occur to me.
Classical
Right.
music's done. People have already
I
made
mean,
it.
it's classical.
Beethoven
right?
died
It's still
Exactly.
classical music.
100 years
Exactly.
ago. We're done with
Yeah.
this.
And I mean, truthfully, when you go to concerts, I mean, I didn't grow up in like an orchestra family or anything. We didn't.
Right.
Neither of my parents are professional musicians, and they didn't have particular interest in classical music. They were supportive of me, like amazingly supportive, but we didn't go to concerts all the time. So I didn't realize that, of course, there were still composers. It wasn't anything that was on my radar.
Interesting.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, like I said, I took these piano lessons, and you mentioned band. Yeah, I played saxophone and later oboe in my high school band, and I guess elementary school and middle school and
You
high
played
school
oboe in
okay.
elementary school?
I played saxophone in elementary
okay.
school, and when I was in
Saxophone.
11th grade, I essentially just asked the band director, "Hey, can I try out the oboe?" Because, I'm a musician. I was a big
Right.
music nerd, so I had
Yeah, nobody wants to play the oboe.
I had played lots of instruments, like a little bit.
Terrifying.
I'd stolen my sister's recorder. Later, I had stolen her clarinet. So then I noodled in the clarinet. And back in high school, when we had substitute teachers, sometimes we would switch instruments. Little punks. And I had
Sure,
learned enough
that's
trumpet
great.
that I could pass as like the worst trumpeter in the band.
Right.
So I played a lot of instruments, and I thought, oboe's kind of cool. I think I should play the oboe. So he said, yeah, well, actually, we have an extra oboe. So he let me take it home, and I taught myself to play badly. So then I played oboe in band also.
So
That's awesome.
before you realized that composer, musician could be a job, what were you thinking? Fireman,
Well, frankly, I didn't give it much thought at all until it was time to apply for colleges. Like I knew I was going to college. My parents had gone to college, and I knew that everyone,
Right.
who was going somewhere in the world went to college. So that
Exactly,
wasn't
yeah.
even a decision. But I didn't know what I was going to study in college. I hadn't even hadn't thought about the fact that you had to decide. So then in my junior year, when all those, leaflets were coming in from the schools trying to tempt you to apply, I thought, oh, well, what do I like the most of all? And the answer was music. And I thought, well, maybe I should do something else because, I was dimly aware that it wasn't the most lucrative career.
Right.
And I had loved chemistry in high school. I had an excellent chemistry teacher, James Christensen, if you're listening.
Shout out to James Christensen.
There we go.
He was fantastic. So I had actually told myself that I would apply to different schools as a double major. and that was my intent. But of course, if you apply to music schools, you have to apply with, apply on an instrument or apply as a composer with a portfolio of works, things like that. So I had to apply already to the University of Michigan as a composer. I was accepted, and I was intending on doing a double major, figuring how to do that once I got there. And once I got there, I realized it was impossible because all of the organic chemistry labs were exactly the same time.
Right.
Like you couldn't get away from it. They conflicted exactly with musicology.
Was it? I wonder if there was some sort of actual thought behind that, where it's like, well, if we got to sort of set up how these classes are done,
we're going to stop these kids.
No, not even stopping kids, but it's just like we have so many times in the day. What's the overlap between people taking both, this advanced
freshman
chemistry,
musicology and chemistry?
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, it happened very quickly. I was pretty sure I was going to be a musician, but I really did love chemistry, and I thought that was a good idea to have a kind of backup. But then when push came to shove, well, I didn't know that, right? Science seemed stable at least. But when I saw I realized it wasn't going to happen. There was no decision really. It was done. I mean, I was a musician.
Right. That's great.
So Michael, how did your parents feel about you studying music? Since it, like you mentioned, it's not the most lucrative field. I was actually told by my mother, I was a German major and I was going to do German and econ, but my love was music as well. And so it was funny. My parents told me, my dad was a painter, studied art in Berlin. My dad could care less what I studied as long as I was happy. My mom was worried about my future. And so she said, well, we'll let you take guitar lessons, but don't get too into it. Don't study music. And then a week later, I called her. I said, yeah, I declared my major as a musician, as a music major. So how were your parents?
What did she do, though, once you told her, sorry, Mom?
What can she do? She had to accept it. Yeah, she accepted it.
That's what my parents did. I was really not cognizant of the fact that they were being supportive of something that was kind of dangerous. I mean, like I said, I wasn't aware enough to know, but they knew, obviously,
right.
And neither of them were musicians. So they knew without having much information to help them. I mean, how scary is that? But they supported it unequivocally.
That's great.
I mean, what more... Really, I mean, financially supported it, spiritually supported it, emotionally supported it. They said, go for it. And really not until quite a bit later, like when the beginning of a career was forming and I realized that, okay, I'll never be a rich person, but I can support myself with this. Then I found out from them kind of, we're really glad that worked out.
Right, sure.
But they kept the whole thing under wraps because I guess they just decided I needed all the support I can get and nothing besides that. It's phenomenal, really.
Yeah, that's definitely, that could make the road so much easier, just that alone.
Yeah.
Even if you're on the most, unknown sort of path, it's like, at least I know I'm not alone on this. And that's very important.
Yeah.
So you went to U of M.
Yes.
Which is a good school. So this means that in high school, you were a good student, I assume. At least
I was a good student.
You got by.
I was a good student.
Chad mentioned that his parents lived down the road from U of M. That's true. He grew up in Dexter, Michigan. You've heard of it?
Yes.
And went to high school in Dexter and all that stuff. I'm surprised that he used that as the sort of landmark for where your school is, because Chad went to grad school at Michigan State.
Yeah.
But that's also a good school. It's also a good music school.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Both are fantastic schools. And I was fortunate being so close to Ann Arbor. I spent a lot of time at is it called Rackham Auditorium or Rackham
It's
Concert
called
Hall?
Rackham. Yeah, Rackham.
I saw a lot of concerts there, a lot of really good, like Christian McBride, the jazz bass player. Saw him play there. Saw a lot of U of M jazz stuff going on there, which was really great. And I have a lot of respect for the program. The music program there is fantastic.
All right, this didn't go the way I was hoping it would go. Let's move on.
Not enough fighting, huh?
No, I guess not.
This is not what I was looking for. No, I'm kidding.
So I have a question for Michael, if you don't mind me interrupting, Jared.
Please.
And this might be a loaded question, so I apologize. But could you kind of walk us and our listeners through of kind of what is your compositional process? Like I said, I know it's a loaded question, but how does it work?
Every piece is different, which is not a cop-out answer. Every piece is different. So where the inspiration comes from is a total mystery. And it varies. Sometimes it's literally just in a musical idea, like a theme in the traditional sense, pops into your head and you have no idea why. Other times you've decided, okay, I'm going to write a piece inspired by something specific. Maybe the commission that you've been asked, excuse me, the commission you received is to write a piece that reflects Japanese culture.
Okay.
So then you've got a place to start from. And sometimes it might be you've seen a painting that inspires you, or you might see the way a bird flies in the park that inspires you. And somehow, as a musician, for me, it transforms itself into something musical. So that aside, after that, once you've got some sort of springboard from which to write the piece, I tend to make a lot of plans about the structure, the form of the piece. Usually, if it's a commissioning situation, you have some restrictions on what you're going to write. Like, you know how long it's going to be, or you know the forces you need to write for, or usually both, how long it'll be and the forces you're writing for. So based on those things, I kind of have an idea of how it's going to unfold dramatically. Like it might be as abstract as I know it's going to start peacefully. It'll reach a climax 2/3 of the way through and then return to the initial feeling of peace. It might be like that, but it could be more specific. But I kind of have a dramatic blueprint essentially in my mind. And then working with some of those initial musical ideas and the dramatic blueprint, I come up with other musical material. Either I work with what I've already come up with, or I come up with contrasting material depending on what that blueprint needs. And once that's done, that's all done like at a table or just sitting around, thinking in my head, but usually taking notes at a table. Then I'm a pianist, so I work heavily at the piano for many, many, many hours at the piano. So then I go to the piano and I work things out, as in I harmonize melodies, or I work out harmonic progressions, or I work out counterpoint, or I work with the notes on like a really detailed level. And then once it's done, once all of the sort of detailed musical decisions are worked out, if it's a large form piece, like not a large form piece, but like for a large ensemble, like orchestra or something, I will have had a lot of details of the orchestration in the music I was writing while at the piano, but not all of the orchestration decisions are done. So then I go back to a desk with that what do you call it? A really, really detailed sketch, or we'd call it a short score in music, like all of the musical information is there on a few staves. It could be 2 staves, could be 5 staves, but not the 25 or whatever in the orchestra score. And then you take that short score and you orchestrate out. So then I do that back at a desk. And then once that's finished, or if I didn't need to do that step because it was for a smaller ensemble, then I input the whole thing into the computer, because nowadays you need to deliver parts that were digitally engraved. You can't.
Sure.
It's really not professionally acceptable anymore to deliver something by hand, a hand copied score.
Right.
So you got like a thinking stage or a creative stage at the beginning, which is a mystery and can come from any number of sources. Then you have, for me, a kind of planning stage, like a blueprint stage. Then the longest stage, which is working out all the details at the piano. Then the sometimes necessary orchestration stage. And then the last stage is really just more like hours of labor, putting it in the computer.
And do you use Finale or Sibelius?
I use Sibelius.
Sibelius. Okay, nice. Yep. That's what I used to use back in the day as well. Very cool.
Yeah.
I use Noteflight, if anyone was wondering. I take piano lessons. I've only been doing it for like 3 years, but an assignment that we have to do all the time, or every year, we meaning all of our students, is we have to write a composition, and it's actually for her children's students, but she makes everyone do it. And this year the theme is pets. I've never had a pet. My sister had some birds, and I have blocked them out of my memory. But could you give me a tip as someone that is obviously a novice composer of, like, I struggle to even start. Like, it's, especially when I have this specific sort of theme I'm working towards. Granted, I struggle. It's not like I'm composing ever. It's hard. I don't really enjoy it. But that's also the thing. I don't really enjoy doing it because I'm not a diligent like you have to sit down and be focused for
months.
Yeah. And I struggle with that. And
so do I.
And usually, that would be my next question. How do you motivate yourself to actually do it? And
there's a deadline. It's that simple. I think that for a lot of creators, procrastination, it seems like a horrible thing, but I think it's really part of the process. I don't know what else to say. And when the deadline comes, for me personally, at a certain point, I must have some really, really finely tuned internal clock.
Yeah, where
because
it's like-
suddenly something deep inside knows that I need to start now.
Mhm.
And if I don't do it, I start to get really irritable and irritating. And then usually a few days into that like negativity period, I think, wait a second, I think I need to start. So then I start.
So do you not compose without some sort, or not write something without some sort of, what do you call it, like a
Commissions?
Commission. Thank you.
Sometimes, but truthfully, in the last like number of years, no, because like in order to plan out your work schedule, you take commissions pretty far in advance, so you know when something's due. So then, if you're going to write
Right.
another piece, either you just bookend enough time that you can do it yourself, but most likely you've had someone already asking who's going to pay you, which you need
Exactly.
to pay your rent and everything.
Sure.
So then you mark off the next set of months to write that piece, and then you just keep doing that in the future.
And that's sort of the balance, I think, of also trying to keep it as creative as possible, where you also, it's like, yes, I did this because I love music and I love composing and all that stuff, but this is still my job, and I still have to do that. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
I still have to support myself with stuff that can't get in the way of that stuff that you deem to be the most important.
Exactly.
And that, do you have stuff that just sits around half done for years and years?
My own personal working method, I finish the pieces and I'm extremely meticulous. Like, you could talk to people who are listening to me compose, or people I ask for advice about, is this version better, A, B, C, D, or E? And they say they all sound exactly the same. But to me, these little tiny differences really matter. So I go into
Sure.
it like with the finest nib on my pen, and I work out everything. And then when you go in for the first rehearsals or the series of rehearsals and the first couple of performances, you change certain things, you tweak them. I usually don't personally change that much. I don't do massive overhauls. But in any case, I tweak it, and I'm usually pretty darn satisfied. And after that point, the pieces tend to be finished, like capital F, finished. And I put them aside, and then I work on the next one.
Okay.
I mean, haven't had the experience myself very often to go back to a piece that was, so-called put away and done, and keep working on it.
Okay.
And so,
Go ahead.
so how, I know this will be a very broad question as well, but how long generally does it take you from the first note you put down on the sheet music to the final bar line? How long does that usually take you?
Depends on the piece. I can tell you about the last two pieces that I wrote, and then you can figure out if there's some kind of pattern here. I finished a piece just last week. It's a almost 10-minute orchestra piece for the Great Falls Symphony in Montana, and it'll be
cool.
premiered. It'll be premiered in 5 or 6 weeks, 6 weeks or so, in mid-April. That piece I started last summer. I think it was June. I'm not exactly sure anymore, but it was midsummer. Let's say early June, just for the sake of argument. And I worked on it about 2.5 months, and then I stopped. Worked a tiny bit more. Let's say 3 months, just to make it easier. 3 months. Took a longish break. Then I did the orchestration starting in January, and then put the whole thing, put it in the computer and finished everything just last week. So that's 4.5 months, if my math is right.
Sounds about
Four
right.
and a half months of really long hours.
What kind of information? Then we'll get to the second one. What kind of information do they put into the commissions? Like what are they asking for?
This particular piece, actually, that's a good question. Commissions tend to be specific because if people are putting money down for something, they have a reason, usually. It's not casual. This orchestra, this is their 60th anniversary. And for the last 3 decades of their existence, they've commissioned a piece to mark the big anniversaries. So they had a 40th anniversary commission, a 50th, and now a 60th. So they said, for our final concert of the 60th anniversary season, we want a piece that celebrates us in some way. Or it has to be a celebratory piece. But it's up to you how that will manifest in your piece. And I think 2 commissions ago, Great Falls takes its name from a series of waterfalls that are on the Missouri River. Lewis and Clark famously, the Lewis and Clark expedition famously came upon these waterfalls. So 2 decades ago, the commission was about, in some way, I don't know the piece, but in some way about Lewis and Clark. And the city now has the moniker the Electric City because there's a series of hydroelectric works on that river. And so the previous commission 10 years ago was the piece, I think it was called Electric City or something like that. So they said you need to, it would be
Sounds like a
great
Kiss
if you can if you can reflect something of us in your piece, but how you do it is totally up to you. So that's how that was for the Great Falls Commission. The last big piece I wrote before that was a string quartet, just over 20 minutes, I think 21. And a string quartet takes less labor at the end in terms of inputting into the computer, or at least ostensibly it should because there's only 4 staves instead of 30 staves. That piece, let's say I should have started it 5 months before the deadline. And I could sort of feel as I was approaching that should have mark that I should have started. That, like I said, it should have been a 5-month kind of piece. So even though ostensibly it's less, it's a longer piece, and chamber music writing tends to be more detailed. Frankly, there's more like the density of the texture is a lot higher. So there's a lot more tiny decisions you need to make. At least that's how I think of it. Orchestra music is painted with a little bit of a broader brush. So the musical content itself in the chamber pieces, you have to get in there a lot more detailed, in a detailed manner. So 5 months, I think, is probably what it should have been for that like 21-minute piece. It was less. And near the end, it was very, very like nail-biting kind of situation because I had started a little too late.
Which string quartet was that? Was that number 2?
Number 2, yeah.
It was. Oh, great.
It was.
That's a fantastic piece. I've been listening to a lot of your music the last few days to try to prep for our interview and our episode, and I'm also just a general lover of string quartets and different things. And so I was curious. I saw one of your YouTube videos, and have you come up with a name yet for the string quartet number 2?
No, I haven't. When I was giving like the pre-concert introduction to the piece, I said to the audience that it would be nice if the quartet had a name. Like a lot of famous quartets are nicknamed by the publisher or nicknamed by someone in music history or sometimes by the composer. So they call it string quartet number 2, comma.
Untranslatable.
Exactly. So
geez.
I don't have one yet.
Okay.
I don't have one yet.
I don't have any ideas for you, but I was just curious. Okay.
Let me know.
I'll give it a couple more listens and see what comes to mind.
I'm sticking with untranslatable, but that's just me.
So, can I ask a few more questions about the string quartet number 2, Jared?
Oh, please.
Okay. So, I was listening to it earlier, and first of all, I really love the differences with all the different movements, especially the beginning of the second movement with a lot of the pizzicato and I believe it's the violins.
Yep.
So how do you view when you compose something that has a few different movements? Do you try to make the movements very contrasting? Do you try to kind of connect them all together? How does that process work for you?
Both, absolutely both. They have to connect together because if they don't, then why are they together? Essentially, why are they not just 3 separate pieces instead of a 3-movement quartet? But also, they have to be contrasting, for me at least, because why otherwise would you have 3 separate parts? It's a balancing act. So in that particular piece, I'd actually originally planned to write 4 movements, which is kind of like the classic string quartet structure. You write a hefty first movement, you write a slow-ish second movement or totally slow second movement, you write a lighter weight third movement, and then you write a kind of upbeat finale. That's pretty much what people have done. People have done a lot of things, but that's the most classic standard structure. And the string quartet, the Dover quartet that commissioned it, had told me, we've had a lot of works written in the 10-minute category, and we would really like to get some what they called repertoire pieces, like hefty, big pieces, multi-movement. So I thought, I'm going to write a big piece, big capital B, piece, capital P. So I told myself I'm going to write one of those pieces just like any of the Gödel boys did. So I had finished the first movement and I had finished the second movement, and I was aware of the deadline and I was aware of how long those 2 movements were, but I wasn't actually aware. And I went through it in my head with a stopwatch. Like I had the stopwatch going and I played the piece in my head, and I was really surprised how long they were already. I think at that point they were like 14 minutes or something like that. And the commission, I think, was originally for 18. This was something like 18 to 21 minutes, something like that. And the second movement, especially the one with the pizzicato you mentioned, is pretty long. I think it's 8.5, maybe 9 minutes long, and it's mostly slow. And it's a pretty weighty movement. And something just intuitively, I realized that if I were to write the lightweight third movement followed by an upbeat fourth movement, something about the overall structure, the balance would be off.
Okay.
It needed to be a lot more really energetic, upbeat music in order to compensate for the really sort of heavy, dark second movement. So I scrapped my plan, or I changed my plan, let's say, and I decided I needed to write a pretty long, like let's say 6 minutes or more, fast movement for the last movement.
Mm-hmm.
And when a piece is fast, it means usually they have a lot of notes.
Sure.
It takes a lot more work. So it was like nose to the grindstone right up until the deadline. But I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think the balance between the three movements works.
Are you a late night worker? Like, do you enjoy sitting in front of the piano at 3 a.m. or something?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I tend to work in the last couple of years. I don't know why, but it's just sort of worked out this way. I tend to work in the afternoon, like right after noon specifically, like 12:30 or 1. I start, and then if it's a normal working situation, meaning there's not like a pressuring deadline coming, I stop right around dinner. So it's like 12:30 or 1 up until 6:30, something like that. And if there is pressure, then I just go until about midnight, or let's say 11, something like that. Yeah,
Okay, that's still a long time.
it's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything else? Any other questions about this piece,
I
Chad?
have lots of
He's got lots, I
questions. I'm just nerding out right now, so my apologies.
Go for it.
Forget my
So
notes.
you mentioned
Chad mentioned I'm the notes guy. Forget them.
right,
I see them though. There are a lot of them over there.
I've gotten to half of one.
right. Yeah, we should have booked you for 3, 4, 5 hours according
your
to all of our
computer's
notes.
plugged in, so I think we're okay.
Yeah, we got plenty.
But yeah, so I was also wondering. You mentioned how I believe it was the string quartet number 2 was inspired by a Hungarian composer. Am I right, or am I thinking of a different composition?
Maybe a different one, or maybe you're just getting mixed up. You thinking of Romania, or is it specifically
Romania. That's it exactly. Okay. And you mentioned taking folk music and classical music. So how do you actually set folk music in a classical context without having it just be orchestrated folk music?
So that's a big question. You could ask a lot of people that question and get different answers. In the terms of this second string quartet, it was the third piece, or it is the third piece I wrote that drew something from Romanian music, and so far it's the last, the third and the final one. I don't know if it'll keep going, but to answer your question better, I think I have to back up just a little bit. In more than a little bit, to be honest.
That's fine.
I became interested in the music of a Romanian composer named George Enescu.
Mm-hmm.
Back when I was a student at U of M, I think it was in 2000, I heard a recording of one of his works, which is a sonata for violin and piano, like sonata number 3. Mm-hmm. And in that piece, Enescu, he doesn't actually use any folk themes, but he calls the piece sonata in the folk character. Like he lays it out there. His first violin lessons were from a folk violinist, and he's a fascinating, complex musical personality. But he had a lot of folk elements in his music already. That were, in certain pieces, they were very overt. In other pieces, they were kind of just part of the DNA. But in that piece, Enescu said, I'm just going to write a folk piece. So he wrote this classical piece, which he called in the folk character. And in 2000, I had just never heard anything like that. It really blew my mind. I thought it was crazy. I thought it was delightful. I thought it made no sense. I thought it was compelling. I mean, it just changed things for me. Mm-hmm. And because of that piece, I became interested in Enescu as a composer, and I got to know his music little by little. As far as I know, I've gotten to know every piece he's written. I mean, I became like a severe Enescu nerd.
Okay, cool.
And in learning more and more about Enescu and learning more about his music, of course, people like ancillary people in his career, their names came up. So all these Romanian names were coming up, and I realized that I'd never heard of the vast majority of them, just never. And I thought that was kind of strange because other cultures, there are sort of, I don't want to say second rate, but less important in musical history terms.
Sure.
Less important composers from France. We still know who they are, and their pieces are still performed from time to time. And, record companies will decide to do recordings like complete works of Pierre Ney or something like that. But in the case of these Romanian guys and women, men and women, they were just totally unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really strange. So then the curiosity started to drive some like small, let's call it armchair research. And I started looking into their music too. And the more and more I got to know about their music, I realized there was an extremely rich musical culture. Now we're specifically just talking classical musical culture, like concert music culture in Romania that was basically unknown as far as I could see, and still mostly to this day outside of their own borders, unknown. And some of it I think has to do with political reasons and economic reasons, but it also has something to do with just cultural reasons. I'm not sure if the music doesn't resonate, or in my feeling, I don't think they're a terribly self-promoting culture. That has something to do with it. But for whatever reason, this music was just not known. So I started discovering more and more and more Romanian classical music, some of which I thought was really good. And a lot of Romanian music from the middle part of the 20th century was inspired, overtly or not, by folk music. Sometimes by the music itself, sometimes by the idea of folk music, or by ideas like we should be using folk music to inspire ourselves, that kind of concept. So as a result, at a certain point, I thought, gosh, I wonder what would happen if I were also inspired by that same folk music. So then I started learning a little bit about the folk music. Not anywhere to the same extent that I've looked into their classical music scene, but they have a really rich folk music culture also. Even to this day, in the 21st century, there's still like folk music that's alive, genuine folk music that's alive in Romania. So I got to know a little bit about the folk music, and then one day decided, I wonder what would happen if what would happen if that music were kind of reflected through the prism of my own musical personality. And I wrote a few pieces, like I said, three pieces that reflected something of that Romanian folk music. And the latest one, that string quartet, was a little bit different. In the first couple pieces, I had more or less, like you said, not exactly orchestrated folk music, but used folk themes, like actual folk themes, and sometimes just harmonized them as simply as that. In the way of like early Bartók, he did the same thing. He took folk music and harmonized it. Whereas in the string quartet, I mean, I'm not really comparing myself to Bartók in terms of the depth of his involvement with folk music, but in the same way that in later Bartók, he composed music that was influenced by the ideas and the feelings of folk music, but it wasn't actually folk music that he was writing.
Right.
The string quartet is a little bit like that. Now, some of the parts of the string quartet do actually use folk themes. So I take a theme and harmonize it, so to speak, as simply as that. Or it could be that the theme itself was modified, as in it was slowed down a whole bunch, or the intervals of the actual musical theme were changed. And then in some parts, it's just the feeling of like how a certain kind of Romanian folk dance feels, and then I compose music that felt the same.
Oh,
so
cool.
it interacts with the folk music in a lot of different ways, actually.
That's great.
Now, I came across you at the Red Velvet Hulk concert. That was a couple months ago. And you put on a performance with a violin, and she played one viola piece, I believe,
Yeah.
and then a cellist.
Yes.
And I remember specifically during the piece that was, it was a Bartók piece, I believe the last one, and the cellist, Clancy was his name, was mentioning that you could tell about during the performance that he mentioned that it was one of his favorites and he loved it, but you could tell while he was performing that I actually mentioned this on the podcast after we did this because we talked about this. It very much came through, but he also mentioned that he never felt that it was he could play it and like perform it and give it its due because he was in groups that didn't seem to respect the piece as much as some of the more prominent classical artists.
Yes, I remember. Okay. So I think the piece, the last one, the like a big long piece, 6 movements. Yeah. So that piece is a piano trio by Dvorak. And I remember
Dvorak.
I remember
My
what you
man.
were talking about. Bartók was the first one.
Yes.
Yeah, but I know exactly what you're talking about because I remember Clancy talking when he introduced that piece that Dvorak wrote music that was, I mean, I don't know where he got the quote from or whether he was just I don't know if it's an actual Dvorak quote or not, but Clancy explained to us that Dvorak had tried to write music for the people, that he was trying to write music that would be directly relatable for regular people as opposed to people who are already habituated to concert halls. And Dvorak himself did later on make a big deal out of the fact that we, meaning composers, should be inspired by the folk music of our countries. And it's interesting that you say, like Clancy mentioned, sometimes Dvorak is not accorded the same kind of respect as other composers from a similar period or shortly before. And I tend to agree. I don't really understand why. I think it probably has to do with some cultural ideas of maybe like culturally chauvinistic ideas of Dvorak was not German. He didn't fit into the German-speaking like culture, which is for many people the sort of like pillar of the classical repertoire. And I do think that in general, a lot of the 19th century non-Germanic composers tend to be written off as nationalist. That was just like a convenient way of saying you're not like us.
Right.
Funny how that happens throughout history. But regardless of whether he is or was as respected as, say, Beethoven or Schubert or any of the German guys, Dvorak does write music that is sometimes reminiscent, redolent of folk music, and sometimes really, really, in the case of his Ninth Symphony from the New World, he famously came to the United States to teach for quite a few years, and famously told American composers we should be looking at our folk music heritage to be inspired, because that's where we get our national identity from. Supposedly, some of the themes in his Ninth Symphony are actually American folk themes. So it's not that he was walking the walk as well as talking the talk. So it's funny you bring up that piece in specific, because it does tie into what we were talking about with my own sort of casual, at best, relationship with Romanian music.
Yeah. Have you ever taken any sort of professional or like a non-professional music-based trips? Like, say, I want to go to Romania because I love this music and I want to experience it or somehow expose myself, however that is.
Yes. Is that a leading question, or are you just lucky? So yeah,
I'm a genius.
last fall, I
I'm a
had
professional podcaster. That's what it is.
yeah. I mean, like I said, I had been interested in the music of Enescu and then these other composers. So a number of years ago, maybe 6 years ago, something like that, I was in Berlin for a friend's wedding, and I was going to be in Vienna afterwards.
Oh, beautiful!
And the price
Some of our favorites.
The price of the flights between the two cities was almost the same as the price of a flight that would go to Bucharest and then from Bucharest to Vienna.
Oh, cool.
I mean, it was $50 more.
Right.
So I said, heck, I'm going to Romania. Like, I don't really know what is going to happen, but I'm going to go. So first time I was in Romania, I was only in Bucharest, and I spent, I think, only 4 days there. But in the 4 days, like, I went to every major musical institution I could to glean whatever I could in terms of scores or recordings.
Soak it in.
Because it's, I mean, still to this day, most of the scores are just frankly not available outside of the country. You have to either find them on their Romanian equivalent of eBay, or you have to go there physically and get the stuff. So I did that. And
so
then
this can turn into an expensive trip. You have to buy all of this.
This was $50, right, for the extra plane flight, and I was only there 4 days, so that was totally worth it. But the reason I thought maybe you had like done more research or something, last fall I went back to Romania because. To refer to what we were talking about before, in the course of doing this, let's call it armchair research about other composers, I found that the vast majority, and really the vast majority, like 95% or more, of any scholarship, serious or not, just even commentary about Romanian classical music, is only in Romanian language. Really. There's a little bit in French, because they had culturally a serious love affair with France at the beginning of the 20th century. So a lot of composers went to France to study, and some went to German-speaking places to study, but mostly France. But contemporary scholarship, or even like relatively recent scholarship, is almost exclusively in Romanian. So I realized if I wanted to get farther into it, I just would have to study Romanian. So I got a Teach Yourself Romanian textbook and some CDs, and I studied it for like 9 months, give or take some months. And then at a certain moment, I realized, heck, well, I mean, I've gotten through this book and I know these grammar structures, but if I'm really going to use it, I just have to be in Romania again. So I took a short language course. And while I was there, I got to contact a lot of Romanian musicians, like composers and musicologists and things like that.
So you had to actively use that Romanian that you
It worked, it really worked. And
wow.
And like you said, you soak it up, glean, whatever you can from the experience. Yeah, that was extremely fascinating. extremely interesting experience.
Do you think that learning? You still? I assume obviously you still know some of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I got back in December.
Oh right, this just happened.
That just happened.
So can I ask Michael, how do you say hello in Romanian?
I mean, you can say salut just like casually.
Okay.
If you're doing like the equivalent of bonjour or
Okay.
good day, it would be bună. Well, bună ziua is
Oh,
good
interesting.
day.
Okay.
Bună ziua, good morning is bună dimineața.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Look,
cool.
It's a
Hi,
Romance language.
everyone.
So if you speak Romance languages, you can see a lot of really clear links between the two. But it has
Right.
a lot of Slavic influence too. So
That's why I was curious, because I'm living
Yeah.
in the Czech Republic, and so
Right.
we've done
Yeah,
some
yeah.
different things with Slavic languages, and occasionally I pick up on things. So I was curious if the greetings were similar, but they're completely different.
those are Romance ones. Yeah, they sound
Yeah.
like quasi-Italian or something. Yeah.
Right.
I
Yeah,
also
yeah.
remember that dobry is, I believe, also the same in Romanian, isn't it?
Dobry. Well,
means
Buna is good in Romanian.
Yeah,
Is it not
Dobry would be
Romanian?
good
Oh.
in Czech. Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew that was, but I
Yeah.
read so many of those. Do you think that you learning the language has helped positively influenced your if your enjoyment or your composition of folk music, unless you just got back? So, do you think because you know the language, if you were to write another sort of folk piece, or if you were to look back at some of your other ones, it could influence it? You could say no. That's okay. I'm an idiot.
I'm thinking. No, you're not an idiot. I think no, but it's because on the one hand, I mean, I don't really speak it well, right? Like
Sure.
the language course I took was like European B1 level, so that's hardly a fluency.
Right.
That's part of it. It's my relationship with the language is not a high enough level. And even if it were at a higher level, I think it's still so short term. I mean,
Right.
I've only really been caring about Romanian language for like a year and a half, like almost, close to 2 years. So I don't think it's gotten in there deep enough.
Did you? How did your French get while you were there?
It got good. It's
Yeah.
it's a little rusty now because it was a long time ago. But there was a time when I felt very comfortable speaking French about whatever with anyone. It was fine.
Oh,
Nice.
cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I don't
I'm
know
trying
if Jared has mentioned to you, but here at the Untranslatable Podcast, we are definitely huge supporters and proponents of learning foreign languages, learning about other cultures, and I think we also view music as a great way to kind of bridge that gap between language and culture. And it gives you a kind of a different motivation or reason as well. And I'm just curious, did learning that little bit of Romanian or also French while you were in Paris, did that give you a deeper appreciation of the music and the culture?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's a leading question, right? I mean, how could you say no? Yeah, if you learn a language, all sorts of doors open up. I mean, physically and metaphorically.
That says push, not pull.
right, that's true.
I mean, in France, where I spent enough time, I mean, I have spent quite a bit of time. Yeah, people's hearts and minds open up in a way they never ever will when you address them in their native language, I mean, without any question. I think that's.
I've noticed that specifically about French people is they definitely seem to be. I don't speak French that well. I can hobble along if necessary, but my sister's fluent.
Yeah.
And I've definitely noticed that things seem to go a lot smoother, even if the person does speak English. If my sister is the one that's leading the conversation.
Well, I think it's true that like certain cultures have strong. Oh, I don't know how to put it. French people, let's just say this. I can't really generalize, but French people are very proud of the French language. They really are.
Absolutely.
And I think they have good reason to be. I mean, I like it too. And they have extremely like developed literature, like literary culture. I think they've got a lot of reasons to be proud of their language. So yeah, in terms of France, they respond very well when you talk to them in French.
We've both spent a lot of time in Austria and Germany, and it's almost kind of the opposite in my experiences.
Yeah.
I'm a good German speaker, but they notice I'm American when I start talking. And I've often had conversations where they're speaking English and I'm speaking German. I'm like, no, I'm in Germany.
Don't
I
you
want to
hate
speak German.
that?
And
I
they're like,
know.
we can practice our English.
I know.
I don't. Let me have this.
I don't see that happening though in Paris.
I don't see that happening in Paris either. I see someone trying to struggle with English and the person just being like, no, I don't know what you're talking about.
You know what's funny though? When I first was in Paris, it never, ever, ever, ever happened. And now people are speaking English a lot more.
Really interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I
Globalization.
personally, yeah, I don't think it's for the best. Actually, it's a little strange. I don't live there. I haven't lived there for a long time, but still, when I go back now, when I'm in Paris, I really get the feeling like it's not as French as it used to be.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying.
Really doesn't feel as specific. Maybe it's not that it's not so French. I mean, that's the truth. But the thing that irks me is that it's not so specific. You know, when you go to certain cities, they feel like that place. You go to other cities and they feel a little bit, well, I don't know. Maybe you're
Diluted
I hope
with
you're not.
tourism.
I hope you're not Brussels fans. But when you go to Brussels, to me, it just feels like Europe.
Okay.
In the pan-Europe sense, it
Sure.
doesn't feel so specific. Which, just my, what I like, what I respond to. I don't get excited when you go to Paris. When you went to Paris 20 years ago, it was really, really darn French. When you go
Sure.
now, oh yeah, it's French, but it's not quite the same.
And I think that's why we, or at least I claim it to be sort of overrated, because it's become too much of its own thing to where now tourism takes over. I mean, you can't go anywhere really within
Yes.
sort of the main area of
Yeah.
Paris and not just hear, I mean, not even just English, just
Anything.
a bunch of, and some people say that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But it's one thing if those people live there, and it's another thing where it's like I hate to say tourism ruins culture.
No. I have two things I want to say, like in
But
response to
if
that.
but if you live in a place long, let me just say this:
Yeah,
if you live in a
finish.
place long enough, you even if you are like if you're from the same country as that person, you can come to get very annoyed by tourists.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think it's really good to be confronted with other languages and other cultures all the time. Like, I think we need to develop respect and tolerance for difference,
Right.
but I think we need to preserve the difference. I think
Sure.
there's no interest in a world where everything becomes the same color.
Right.
I'm not interested at all. That's my philosophical thing. My second point is I remember the last time I was in Italy, I was there with two other composers. We were involved in this interesting project where we each composed part of an opera. It's complicated, but in any case, we were in Florence. All three. Well, actually, that's not true. Well, she is now. She wasn't at the time American.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Taiwanese woman. Now she's a dual citizen, and two Americans. And we were walking through Florence, and somebody called out to us in absolutely perfect, unaccented American English, "Hey guys, want some ice cream?" And we looked over, and it was an Italian girl selling ice cream to tourists. Of course, in the most touristic part of Florence. But
Sure.
it just shattered something that was magical. It really, really did.
But she probably gets so much more business. Just
Of
because she
course,
can
I can't
master that.
blame her. I mean,
Right.
I'm complaining here, but she has to pay her rent too.
Exactly.
I would laugh if you listen to her say any sort of non-ice cream related sentences, and she's just the most broken English.
Oh, that's funny.
I hope so. I really hope so.
It's
should-
really. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I see a lot of parallels with Prague with this. I mean, I go there very often. It's a wonderful city, but most Czechs you talk to, they're like, yeah, don't go to Prague. There's just too many tourists. And when you have so many tourists there, it kind of waters down the culture. It makes it so, I'm planning on taking Jared to some more authentic Czech places, but the places I'm really looking forward to are actually in my small town and not in Prague, because in Prague you get the tourist, kind of the bastardized version of whatever culture you see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. What kind of other music do you listen to? Like if you're just walking down the street with your headphones on.
I hope this isn't disappointing. I don't listen to music.
Okay. That's better than-
Interesting.
I thought you were going to say Katy Perry or something like that.
No, I mean, how can you explain it? It's a job. I love music. Without a doubt. I mean, I'm spending all of my waking moments just about thinking about music. But I'm spending almost all of my waking moments thinking about music, and it is my job. So if I'm not working, I'm probably not listening to music.
What do you like to listen to? Do you podcast?
Silence.
Silence.
Oh,
Okay.
Man, I'm so jealous. I'm so bad. I always have headphones in.
Never.
I'm always listening to something. And I actually I haven't really started, but I did make a resolution, and even I bought a yoga mat, so I'm halfway there. But just my plan is to try to meditate more, just because I always am listening to something or have headphones in, and it's and I like it, but it's almost like a way to avoid what's actually going on in my head. Almost.
Sure. Yeah. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't talk about you, but I think people do distract themselves from their thoughts deliberately. I think that on some level, people are aware of what they're doing.
Yeah, I think I'm one of those people. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I like it, all right? So what do you like to do in your free time? Like when you're not, if you're...
I really like languages, so I would spend a lot of time studying foreign languages.
Are you still actively keep that up?
Yeah, I try to have like a book always going in some foreign language. Like when I came back from France, I realized that I was going to lose it if I didn't keep using it. So I brought back with me lots and lots of books.
Yeah. And
that's how I got to know French literature, is living in Philly, like reading French books. And then same thing with any language that I studied. So when I was like, I guess in middle school. Wow, what year was that? Yeah, middle school. I studied Spanish, and I studied it up through high school. Like, took some college courses in it. So I developed Spanish to a pretty good degree, and then like I had to learn French when I was in Paris, and took a little bit of German, and now some Romanian, and so I have lots of books in the library, and I'm like constantly cycling through them in order to maintain the languages. So on the nightstand right now, there's a French book and a Romanian book.
Do you find it easier or harder to maintain that knowledge with the variety of languages, or is it easier to focus on one?
Good question. I do know that I get mixed up in languages.
That's
like
normal.
When I speak,
That's
one
normal.
of them, yeah, right? Mm-hmm. Some people I've talked to, because I like talking about language all the time too, right? Mm-hmm. Some people tell me that they don't, and they actually don't. Like, I see them switch from Russian to German or what, and just they switch. That does not work for me. I have some kind of circuit in my brain that says, this is native language of English. Here's where you put all the other ones, and some are stronger than others, right? Obviously, and some are more in the present. So like if I'm in Romanian mode because I've been speaking Romanian for a while, and then I try to speak French, probably not French, it's a little bit better, but let's say German or something that's kind of weak, I'll just start throwing in little words in Romanian with, it doesn't make any sense, but that's what comes out. If they sound the same too.
Exactly. And what I can tell you, Michael, as a language teacher and a foreign language learner as well, is that usually until you really develop fluency to the point where you don't have to think too much in the language, our brains generally will kind of put all the foreign languages in one box, right? So when I'm learning Czech right now because, it's really helpful. I live in a town of 50,000 people, and a lot of people are very intimidated to try to speak English. They just assume because I'm a native speaker, every mistake I hear, I'll either think they're, unintelligent or uneducated or what have you. So I have to usually try to speak Czech when I'm here, which has been great, and it's been a wonderful learning experience. But when I first started learning Czech, I would randomly throw German words in there. Even though my German's fluent, it was still kind of in one box. And then I've learned a little bit of Spanish as well. And so it's funny, whenever I try to do Spanish or Czech, sometimes German will slip out. And I think the only way you can really get to the point where you can separate them is to where you're, probably at like a C1 or a C2 level at those languages. Or maybe if you live in the country long enough and you hear it enough and you're just surrounded in that environment. But that's pretty normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to move on to the song of the pod?
Yes, I do. So we thought it would be great, especially because we have your insight to talk about one of your compositions. And the composition is Songs of Spring. So we want to feature that for our episode today. So Michael, what can you tell us about the composition?
No, before you say that, I want to know why you chose this piece, Chad, because you specifically chose it.
I just really liked it. I mean, there's really, I wish I had a more intellectual reason why, but I listened to it and I really enjoyed it.
Better than that, I'm not gonna lie.
Right?
No, I think that's the best answer, honestly. Like when it comes to responding to art, I think it's as simple as whether you like it or not.
Yeah,
I really do.
That for sure. I mean, you can analyze it to death, but it's either do you want to listen to it or do you not want to listen to it.
Right.
Yeah.
I have one question. How do you choose the people that play your pieces? And as a meticulous artist, is it hard? Because I feel like for me, I'm not a meticulous person, and I feel like it would be very hard.
Most of the time, well, it depends. Like, I can say how you choose the people you work with.
Right.
People who play your pieces, it's sometimes
it's not
behind
up
your
to you?
control. Yeah.
Yeah.
For instance, in Songs of Spring, it was commissioned by the National Cherry Blossom Festival in Washington, D.C. They have an annual festival that celebrates Japanese culture and the ties between D.C. and Tokyo. And they try to time it at the moment when the cherry blossoms open in D.C. That particular commission was done with another organization called the Ryuji Ueno Foundation, which supports classical music, and they put together a quintet of musicians to play the piece. So that case, I just delivered the goods, and they played it. I didn't have any choice.
Been in a situation where that's been problematic?
Anytime you're in a situation with a lot of people that you didn't get to, specifically choose, it can become problematic.
Where do you
That particular group was great. I mean, that's a different situation.
Yeah, we're not talking about them specifically.
Yeah,
Let's just clarify.
But no, all the time. If you work with, let's just say an orchestra, it's a large group of people, many of whom have been working in that orchestra for a long time. They may not be as committed to artistic integrity as they once were. It's their job too, right? They show up to work. So then sometimes you have problems.
As someone that has a normal day job as well, where sometimes I have to manage people, I really struggle with sort of the follow up and the checking in on people and telling them they did something wrong and all that stuff. Where's the line for you where you're like this person doesn't seem to be getting my note, and this is my music that I've made, but I also have to just let it go, or I have to make this clear.
In general, I'm really lucky, I think. I've had good success, good experiences working with musicians. Usually when I offer feedback, offer criticism, they take it well.
Okay.
I've been told by a lot of musicians that they're kind of surprised at how specific the criticism is, like the indication, like directions and suggestions are. But the same people have often said, but I like it because you know exactly what you want and you have a really clear, reason behind what you want us to do, so we get it, and so nobody takes it personally, and it works well. Sometimes it doesn't. There are always other situations. It's like being a manager at work, right? It's the same. You have to do your best to figure out how hard you can push someone to get what you want, and then you need. In the end, if you're not performing, they're the ones that are going to play the notes well or poorly and make you and your piece sound good or not.
Exactly.
So you have to. It's a little bit of a dance.
Reflection of me. And I'd much rather just do this on my own.
or you'd much rather it sound good.
Yes.
If you're not doing it on your own, right? So you have to see how hard you can push someone. Yeah.
Okay. So we can get back to the song. Sorry, I digressed a little bit. It was and actually what you saying, how the commission came about, adds a lot more context to it. Because I did notice, I wasn't going to say Japanese specifically, but sort of a Asian influence on the song and some of those chords. And it was great. Yeah, I loved it. It was great. Do you have any songs that you would say, you don't have to even rank them, but some songs that you're like, this is some of my best, or it's like, or is it like, oh, these are my children and they're all unique?
No, some pieces are better than others,
you're
for
like,
sure.
My favorite. It's like
my favorite, I don't know. I have a viola and piano piece called Wally Mai, which tends.
Oh, you played that?
Yes, you heard it. You heard it at the concert.
It's on Spotify as well.
It was played at the concert because that was the viola and the cello alone, right?
No, that's another one. But the one after that, when I did play with the viola,
that's the Serbian one. Is the one?
No, that's the cello one first.
Shut up.
It's okay. No. But you did hear it. You did.
This was months ago, by the way.
It was the piece that was. It was inspired by a short story by Isabel Allende.
Yes,
that one. Well, okay. So I have this piece. Yeah, I think I'm supposed to be telling you my favorite children. I like Wally Mai. I think it's a strong piece, and everyone seems to like it. Like it seems to hit all the right buttons, if that makes any sense. Like regular folks think it's great, really dramatic, very they respond emotionally. People in the biz, like the ones who have more demands intellectually, let's say, they seem to think it's good enough. Performers like it. It seems to be a win-win-win. It's a crowd pleaser, and I like it. I think it's a good piece.
I enjoyed it very much. I also noticed that. This is just my own observation, but you seem to do a very specifically good job with adding the cellos into there. When the cello always seems to stand out to me in a very specific way, and I don't know if that's something you plan for or not, but it always seems like, not always, but in a lot of pieces it seems like the cello is almost subtly leading the piece.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, every instrument within the context of classical music has kind of developed its identity in a certain way. And whether or not the instrument really needs to be played that way, needs to serve those functions, that's the culture that surrounds that instrument. So cello is kind of interesting because it's a low instrument, right? It's a big one and it produces low pitch sounds, but just the way that it's physically set up, you can also access high pitches easily without, there's a huge range. So the cello's role in chamber music tends to like be multifaceted. Sometimes they provide the bass voice, kind of subtly, they like support the ensemble. But then because they can get high easily, and because they can do it, well, I shouldn't say easily, I think it's kind of hard actually, but because they're expected to do it, they develop the capacity to go all over the place and play technically or expressively in any range. So writing for cello is fun because you can make it do different things. Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that versatile. You think it's a versatile in my music.
Yeah, it was very cool. We both enjoy listening to it, and we I mentioned we do this Song of the Pod thing that we're actually doing right now, and it's not the first one we've done that. When after the Red Velvet Hall concert, we also featured a song which now I can't remember which one.
Long ago.
Thank you. As I was saying that, I was like, why am I saying this? Because I don't remember which song it was. But what I'm getting at is we do both enjoy your music very much, and it's unique, and it seems like a difficult lane to be a contemporary composer in such a regimented art and still sort of find your voice and be unique. And I think you do a good job.
Yeah, I would agree.
And we enjoyed having you. Thank you very much.
It's been great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really, really appreciate it. And for all of our listeners out there, we'll have some links to not only the Song of the Pod on our Twitter, but also if you want to find out some more information about our guest today, we'll post that on our various social media for you because we really want to, you've taken the time to talk to us and we really appreciate it. We'd also like to try to give back and get our listeners
spread a little love.
Exactly, to spread a little love.
That's one of those stupid drops I was telling you.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you very, very much, Michael. We really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to seeing what you have in store in the future in terms of your compositions. And I also want to say I've been doing also some Google research or armchair research. I really like that term, armchair research. Might have to start using that. And I hope you have a great time coming up in March in Ann Arbor. Going back, it looks like you're going to be kind of all over the Midwest.
That particular, I think I know what you're talking about. I won't be there for those
just
performances.
Your pieces are being performed.
Just my piece, yeah.
Gotcha.
That's a saxophone guitar duo that's doing a tour of schools in Michigan and Ohio.
Oh, cool. Okay.
I would love to go back to Ann Arbor, though.
When's the last time you were back in Michigan? It's been a long time.
It's been a long time since I've been in Ann Arbor. My grandparents lived in the Upper Peninsula, so I visited them more frequently.
Okay.
But Ann Arbor, no, I actually can't tell you. It might actually be the year I graduated, 2005. Is that possible?
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think it's true.
Get back.
I was there. After I had graduated, I went back in, I think, October, November for a couple concerts. That might have been the last time. November 2005.
I wonder, Chad, you would probably know better than all of us, but is there been a big change in Ann Arbor in those 14 years? Like, if he were to go back now, would he be like, I barely recognize this place? I mean, he'd still recognize it. I can answer
you
that
definitely
part,
still recognize it. I mean, the only thing is, little restaurants, different bars, different shops.
Yeah,
Other than that,
happens.
I mean, Ann Arbor is weird like that where, my dad grew up there, and he said it pretty much has almost the same vibe. It's gotten bigger, but downtown Ann Arbor has kind of the same vibe it's always had since like the 60s and 70s. So kind of interesting. But yeah.
We love I love Ann Arbor. We're always hanging out there when we're in Michigan. So yeah, thank you very much for having us on. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
So once again, we would like to give a special thanks to our guest, Michael Djupstrom, for being on the Untranslatable podcast. You can check out his compositions on YouTube at Michael Djupstrom. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. It's absolutely fantastic music. He's a fabulous composer. So check those out. We hope any of you who are budding composers or interested in music can gain something from this episode today. We really enjoyed it. It was a great time. And I think it's safe to say we've also learned quite a bit here on the Untranslatable podcast. So we thank you all so much for your support and for listening to all of our listeners all over the world. We really, really appreciate it. And please check out our different social media accounts. You can find us on Twitter, Untranslatable1, also on Instagram, Untranslatable Podcast. And shoot us an email. I need some Czech Untranslatables stat, so please send them our way, untranslatablepodcast@gmail.com. So we really, really appreciate it. We hope all of you have a wonderful day or evening, whatever time you may be listening to this episode. So take care, and here at the Untranslatable Podcast, we say, Děkujeme.